Welcome to another episode of Making Democracy Work, a show on community interest produced by the League of Women Voters of Honolulu and broadcast on Alelo Channel 53 and on demand at alelo.org. The League is a nonpartisan 501c4, and we're happily accepting new members who share an interest in registering people to vote, strengthening our representative democracy, and ensuring the rights and privileges of voters in Honolulu. For more information, visit our website, lwvh.org. Today we're filming on May the 12th, 2022, and we are joined by Sterling Higa, the Executive Director of Housing Hawaiʻi's Future. Welcome, Sterling. I appreciate you joining us.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Sterling Higa. I grew up in downtown Honolulu in the Valley of Nu'uanu. I attended public school, graduating from Roosevelt High School, then went on to the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa, where I earned my undergraduate degree, and then I earned a master's in education at Harvard. In the last decade, I've worked in education, communication, and nonprofits. And prior to joining Housing Hawaiʻi's Future as executive director, I was a debate coach and lecturer at Hawaii Pacific University and a contributing writer for Hawaii Business Magazine. I've also written in the past as a columnist for Honolulu Civil Beat.
Excellent. I've read some of your pieces. You're a prolific writer. I really enjoy them.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the kind words.
Can you tell us a little bit about Housing Hawaiʻi's Future?
Sure. So Housing Hawaiʻi's Future is a movement led by young locals who will create opportunities for Hawaii's Gen Z and millennials by ending the workforce housing shortage. In other words, we're intending to help educate and organize the next generation, equipping them with the skills and the knowledge they need for effective civic engagement, especially around the issue of housing. Many young people are feeling like they have to leave the state because of the cost of housing, and their voices are not always represented in the conversations around housing. So our goal is to get these young people engaged so that they can represent the interests of the next generations.
Excellent. Can you tell us how you're doing that and about some of your projects in past?
Sure. So we do have a major initiative that we'll be rolling out in the next few months called the Stay Movement, which is an individual pledge in support of workforce housing, asking young people and also older people as well to make a commitment to workforce housing and emphasize that attending to the housing needs of our middle class is vital to making Hawaii a better place. We also have a few smaller projects. One is our From Hawaii for Hawaii Club Challenge, which we started last fall. Right now, there are thousands of students on the mainland United States, continental United States, attending colleges and universities, and they're plugged into these Hawaii clubs, and they want to be involved in local issues. And we decided one way they could be involved is to have fundraisers for local housing-related nonprofits. So even if they're 2,500 or more miles away, they can be addressing the housing issue and supporting the good work of some of the nonprofits working on the ground, groups like Hawaiian Community Assets, the Institute for Human Services. So last fall, we had Creighton University, Chapman University, Arizona State University, and Brown University raise about $3,000 for some of these nonprofits and learn about the programs and the operations of some of these groups that are addressing our housing needs. So that's one of our programs. Another program we have is our drive to get young people to volunteer to serve on the neighborhood boards on Oahu. There are 33 neighborhood boards. These tend to be a little bit on the older side, mostly retirees in many cases. We're trying to encourage people under the age of 40 to serve on these neighborhood boards because it's important that we have representation of all of the generations in these bodies because they help inform the civic discourse. And if young people don't show up, their concerns are not always going to be represented.
Yeah, if you're not in the room being represented, it's your interests are not being represented. It's very important. These neighborhood boards, as well as these projects that are helping us with housing, these different organizations, how will being in the room help young people on the subject of housing? How will being in the neighborhood board meetings assist?
Well, I think, there are misunderstandings. So let's say the baby boomers very often don't understand the financial burden of housing for younger people. They are decades removed from purchasing their homes, and the relationship between wages and home prices back then was very different than today. So many of them will make these, I would say inconsiderate statements sometimes and say, if only young people didn't spend $5 on lattes or buy $10 avocado toast, then they would be able to afford homes. What they don't seem to realize is that in many cases, even if you stop buying all the avocado toast and all of the lattes, your wages are simply not enough to afford homes. We now have median home prices of more than $1 million on our islands. These are not things that the average person entering the workforce can afford. And we haven't really been building these kind of starter homes or entry-level homes on Oahu, at least, for quite some time. So it is rough for young people who are starting their careers and their families. And then the other thing that older generations are not always in touch with is the amount of student debt that young people graduate with, which really impedes their ability to qualify for loans and to get into the housing market. So it's important when we think about solving the housing problem that we're sensitive to the needs of the people who are actually being affected by it. And young people, I think, are not always considered in those conversations.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview yesterday with the president of the Maui Chamber of Commerce, and she was talking to a gentleman, a planner, I think, and he said that if we don't build houses in the luxury level, people with luxury amounts of money will just buy like the middle class homes, and then the folks that are in the middle class will end up buying lower cost homes, and then we see that problem of no starter homes because we've pushed the cycle of money to buy things that would otherwise may be available to folks and is no longer available because you can't outbid them.
It's a major problem.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about why we don't have the housing stock available that we need for these young folks?
Yeah, there are three primary challenges to building housing in our state. The first is the underlying economics. So we do have scarce developable land. Right now, about 6% of our land statewide is zoned for urban uses. And then material costs are increased because goods have to be imported. Then we add on a regulatory regime, which adds cost, time, uncertainty, and risk to the development process, which means there's less development overall. In some cases, this shades into outright corruption, as was recently exposed in Honolulu's Department of Planning and Permitting. And then you add on another layer of the not in my backyard or NIMBY opposition groups that come out to oppose the development of housing, especially affordable housing. The most notable recent example of this would be in Kailua, where there was a proposed affordable housing project that was ultimately shot down because of community opposition. And this is playing out again in Manoa Valley right now with a proposed senior housing project at the Chinese cemetery in the back of the valley that is currently undergoing a lot of community opposition as well. If you go out on Manoa Road, you can see people sign waving in opposition of this senior housing. So it's not that any one of these things is bad on its own, but if you add in the underlying economics and the regulatory regime and the NIMBY opposition, you have a climate that systematically is not really producing the kind of housing that a local family can afford.
Sure. What can we do as individuals to try and push back on those three particular problems, whether it be regulatory or not in my backyard? What do you think we should be doing, or what can your organization do?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is to push back against the NIMBY people and to force them to encounter the trade-off. No one wants to build new housing in their neighborhood largely. But we have to recognize that if we have increasing demand and we don't build housing anywhere, the people that are being squeezed out are not the luxury buyers. They're doing fine. The people that are left behind in those cases are young local people, right? So it's people's children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, their neighbors. Those are the people that are leaving the states in droves. And we have to have an honest conversation about the current way that we build housing. And then we have to think of creative solutions. So I am not on the train of just build, build, build. We have to be very careful about the kind of housing we build and make sure that that housing is ending up with hardworking local families and not just being bought as investment properties to be used vacant, not just being used as short-term rentals to cater to tourists, but actually ending up with the people we want to have housing.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeking volunteers in any way to assist you with any of the projects? Is that a need of yours?
Yeah, so if people are interested in getting involved with any of our programming or they just want to learn more, the best thing they can do is to email me at sterling@hawaiisfuture.org, or they can go to hawaiisfuture.org and sign up for our newsletter there to stay up to date with what we're working on. And if they prefer social media, we're on Instagram. That's where we're most prominent, at Hawaii's Future.
Excellent. In the past, the League has been very involved in candidate forums and debates. We haven't been doing that as much locally as we'd like to, but we are thinking about doing more in the future. It's my understanding that you all are thinking perhaps about doing some candidate forums. Can you tell us about that? I think our listeners and viewers would be very interested in participating.
Yes, we're in the planning phase for candidate forums for the gubernatorial race in Hawaii. This is a very important race. The executive has tremendous power in coordinating the administration to address problems like housing. And in a normal debate or town hall, there might be one or two questions about housing. And the question is, do you support affordable housing? And the answer is yes, and then it's the next question. We're going to put on a housing-focused town hall where we ask some of these specific questions to get them to really show whether or not they've done their homework and whether they have an actual plan. Unfortunately, if a candidate focuses on campaigning and campaigning only, and they wait until they're elected to come up with a plan for what to do about housing, nothing's going to happen. We've seen that in the past. Candidates say, I'll address housing later on, and the later on never comes. We need a governor who's going to make housing a priority and who has a plan for addressing it. So we're hopeful that our town hall will allow voters to see in depth what the candidates have in terms of their plans so they can make an informed decision.
Excellent. Well, when that occurs, let us know, and we'll, put out a message and maybe attach something to the footer of the video today. Thanks so much. Can you tell us more about your views on remote work and how it impacts housing?
Sure. The pandemic has really accelerated the adoption of remote work by many industries. And what this means is work and home no longer need to be tied together. This is leading to a couple of trends. One is a lot of remote workers who were not from Hawaii in the first place have moved to our islands because it's a wonderful lifestyle. They can surf, they can go hiking, they can do all of the things that we love to do here, while still earning money working for Twitter or Airbnb or whatever other company they work for, whether it's tech or consulting or some sort of white collar work that can be done remotely. This is putting unique pressures on our housing market. Many of these people earn multiples of what the median wage is here in Hawaii, and that increased demand for housing is definitely affecting housing prices here. There's another trend which I think is also worrying, and that is we have a lot of jobs in Hawaii that we thought couldn't be outsourced. These are, administrative, clerical jobs, but I think there will be increasing pressure as government thinks about cutting costs to outsource some of this work, which means jobs that previously employed local civil servants and provided wages, and those wages were dissipated into the community here, could theoretically be outsourced to Indiana or even to India. There's no longer a security in the white collar work here in a world that is fully remote, and we need to prepare for that world.
Yeah, absolutely. We are definitely seeing a lot more remote work than we saw in the past, but remote work has been around for probably 20 something, 25 years, probably longer. I can't remember past 25 years. I was too young. But I do remember people who could work from any computer anywhere in the world, even back then. How should we really be super concerned about remote work today following the pandemic more so than we were before?
I think we should, and it's because it is now a mainstream thing, and Hawaii is a small market, right? So even an influx of 50,000 remote workers from somewhere else has a major impact on housing and a major impact on our communities here. And I think it's conservative to say that 50,000 remote workers might eventually descend upon Hawaii. if you look at how large the workforce is in the continental United States and even internationally as well, we are a very desirable locale. So there are a couple of things I think we need to do to prepare. One of those things is to ensure that we have adequate housing to support the local workers that can't do their work remotely. These are people in healthcare, hospitality, education, civil service, the trades, they're nurses, they're police officers, they're firefighters, they're teachers. They don't have the option to work remotely, and they're competing for a limited housing stock against these foreign buyers, and they deserve support. The second thing I think we need to do is to invest in the education and infrastructure so that local workers can compete for these remote work opportunities, which means investing in things like regional broadband and workforce development initiatives that are upskilling our local workforce so that they can compete on the global stage.
Do you see those types of investments occurring today?
I think that there are exciting initiatives underway. The Workforce Development Council here has a number of initiatives. Within the DOE and the university system, there are a lot of efforts to upskill workers. So they're promising initiatives, and I think they just need more support.
Got it. I'm a professional recruiter, so I'm always looking at this. Should we hire locally or should we hire from someplace else in the country? And looking at the wages that we have here and the challenges around commute times and how close can you live to your job, where can you afford your home? And I see it everywhere in every work location. It's impossible to escape the challenges of commutes and how much money folks are going to make versus how much their home costs to pay rent or to pay mortgages or to save for that eventual next home. How can we better prepare folks for those eventual costs or assist those, like, let's say nurses, with getting the housing that they need so that they can, live close to work and continue their occupation of, helping to save our lives every day?
Sure. I think it's what you said. We have to find ways for people to live close to work. But fundamentally, transportation is a major expense for most families. I think in some cases it can cost $8,000 a year. That's a huge expense on our local families. And if we can make sure that people live in communities where they can work and live in close proximity, go to school, get the groceries, have healthcare access nearby, that can reduce transportation expenses, which means more money in the pocket to pay for healthcare, for education, for all the other things that people might want to do, starting small businesses, donating to local charities. It frees up time for volunteering and for getting engaged civically. So from a social planning perspective, I think in the next 10 years, we are going to move beyond a focus on income when we think about housing allocation. And I think what we'll ultimately settle on is realizing if you can locate somebody within 2.5 to 3 miles of their workplace, you can take at least one car off the road. You can add 2 hours to someone's day that they can spend with their family or in their community. You can improve their quality of life, their health, because now they're relying on multimodal transport to get around. And that's, I think, where we'll be 10 years from now. And we will get there eventually. The only question is how long it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a gigantic cost to traffic. I haven't heard it stated locally, but the amount of time that folks spend in traffic in different cities, including our city, has a cost too, because they're not able to be at work or doing what they need to do at home. And plus, it's just miserable being in traffic.
I agree.
I found a report that I think you worked on in 2019 called Troubled Waters, Charting a New Fiscal Course. And that was published by the Hawaiʻi Executive Council to be highly informative. It discussed things like a need to mitigate the impact of climate change, sea level rise, and natural disasters, costs associated with infrastructure development and maintenance, and unfunded liabilities that must be met to honor public employee pensions and post-employment healthcare benefits. Can you tell us about the report and if any of these concerns raised in 2019 still linger in your mind?
I think we've done some good work to address the unfunded liabilities issue. But we still need to be thinking seriously about our infrastructure investments and about preparing for climate change mitigation, especially sea level rise. We see on the North Shore of Oahu right now homes slipping into the ocean. That's just the tip of the iceberg, because it's not just these beachfront properties that will be inundated eventually, but in like Oahu on the southern shore, there are vast light industrial areas near the airport that will be underwater. And we have to be thinking about planned retreat. How can we ensure that those light industrial uses have other land where they can operate their businesses? Otherwise, we lose these auto repair shops and other things that are vital for our society. A second thing we have to think about is our transportation infrastructure. So on islands like Maui and Kauai, we have ring roads, right? Where the roads go around the edge of the island. And we have to think about low-lying areas that are going to be affected by sea level rise and making sure that we're adapting by, for instance, moving highways and land. This is going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to take a lot of resources. And what we need from our elected officials is to be brave, because it is hard. Infrastructure is not sexy. It's notoriously not sexy. Transportation infrastructure is not sexy. And the only thing less sexy than building a road is moving a road. Because at least building a road, it's a new road. Moving a road, there's all sorts of inconvenience. But these are the things that we have to be addressing. And I think the projections in terms of sea level rise should be of concern to most people on our islands, because it's going to affect the way we live. And at the same time, we need to be thinking about infrastructure in terms of housing. Can we build the housing that we need to support local families? And this is all going to take a lot of investment, and we have to do it as soon as possible.
Absolutely. We have just a few more minutes, another maybe 4 minutes or so. I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about the dangers of climate change and perhaps natural disasters. You brought up the ring roads and the low-lying areas near the airport. Do you know if anyone's ever thought about the elevation of our Honolulu International Airport? Because it seems kind of low to sea level, and it's got really long runways, and it's our main airport on this island.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be necessary work to harden both our airport and like our ports in general against the effects of climate change and sea level rise. One of the things in Honolulu Harbor, for example, is a single large storm could knock the port out of operating capacity, and that impacts our entire island. And because that's a major hub point for our imports, it's a real vulnerability. So we have to be investing in these major points of transportation infrastructure, our airport, our ports, to prepare them for the unlikely but possible event of large storms, which come with coastal flooding and inundation.
I think everyone would agree with you that we should prepare for storms, but when it comes to paying to prepare for storms and for climate change, I think that a lot of people don't want to put that climate preparedness money in, because they don't see the return, and the storms happen so infrequently historically. How can we try and convince them, or how can we convey to them that it's important to put the dollars in to harden these important critical pieces of government infrastructure that commerce is run through and all of our supplies come through?
Well, this is where I think the environmental movement, like housing, benefits from having young people at the table. For most young people, climate change is the political issue that they're most concerned about. Young people understand the issue, they understand the effects, they understand that it's not theoretical, and that the effects are actually manifesting in the world today. And they're actually, in many cases, willing to entertain these solutions, because we can be perfectly honest, they're going to be around to deal with the consequences of inaction. So what we really need are more young people at the table who have this forward-thinking perspective. They're looking at the long term, because they know that it's them that will inherit the problems, their children, their grandchildren. I don't think we can rely on the people who are at the table now to solve the problem. They've had decades to do so, and we haven't made enough progress, especially in terms of adapting for sea level rise. So if we can get more youth engaged in the process, get those voices at the table, that helps to shift the conversation from the space of acknowledging we have a problem into the space of generating solutions and building the political will necessary to enact those solutions today.
Got it. Do you have any worry that we won't be able to afford the things that we need to do next?
I think it's a matter of priorities. I think the state of Hawaii this year, for example, had $1 billion just lying around. It's not a matter of do we have the money in the couch cushions. It's always a matter of are we allocating that money to the place where it will have the greatest return. And that's where people have to be politically engaged, because if government is dominated by special interests and they're able to siphon this money into their pet projects, and we're not addressing these very vital community needs, then we're going to be disappointed in the outcome. And the only thing ultimately that can ensure that we're not falling victim to special interests is a sort of mass movement, right? Of the general public getting engaged, getting educated, getting organized, and advocating for the kinds of policies that will set us up for a good long-term future.
Absolutely. We can always organize. We can always provide advocacy. It's really about having the correct data in front of us, having all the right information, being prepared with that data, and being able to disseminate it effectively to other community members. And that's what we'd like to see over at the League. And I'm very excited to hear you say that. And absolutely, we want to prepare our community, whether it's housing or climate change, and it's good investments, I think, in our future and for the future of our community and grandkids and things like that. Sterling, I look forward to your progress on housing advocacy at Housing Hawaiʻi's Future. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And I want to thank everyone else who's joining us today. Thank you for enjoying this episode of Making Democracy Work. If you're watching online, please do like and subscribe. And until next time, a hui hou.